The Seattle Mariners have been one of the more frustrating teams in baseball over the last several years, and that's not to say that they've been bad. They've been a good team, but what has made them so frustrating is that they have been right on the cusp of breaking through to that next level, but they just haven't done it yet. However, I think 2025 could be very different, as they're making a real case right now to be an AL favorite, and one of the reasons is because they actually went out at the deadline and made a very, very big splash. This is something they haven't really done over the last several years. The last time they made a really significant move to better themselves at the deadline was in 2022. They would trade for Carlos Santana from the Kansas City Royals. Wasn't really a big move at the time though. He hadn't been playing very well, and he didn't really play very well either when he came over to the Mariners. But a big move they did make was trading highly touted prospects Edwin Arroyo and Noelvi Marte to get Luis Castillo from the Cincinnati Reds. And this wasn't the first trade they made with the Reds. Before the season started, they traded for Eugenio Suarez and Jesse Winker. Eugenio Suarez had been a very, very big power bat with the Reds, and these moves would help them make the playoffs as a wildcard team. They would end up sweeping the Toronto Blue Jays in the wildcard series, but unfortunately, they would go on to play the Houston Astros and get swept in a pretty heartbreaking way. One involved a walk-off homer from Yordan Alvarez in game 1 off of newly signed ace Robbie Ray, who was brought in relief, and then game 3 in Seattle was an 18-inning heartbreaker to which the Seattle Mariners got shut out. But this was a step in the right direction for Seattle, and this was the time for Seattle to step on the gas in the offseason and build around this core that made it to the playoffs. They just needed a couple more pieces and they could make a deeper playoff run, right? Well, they ended up doing the exact opposite. In fact, they traded pieces away. They traded former Rookie of the Year Kyle Lewis to the Arizona Diamondbacks. Granted, he had a very short career and didn't amount to anything after Seattle. They also traded away Abraham Toro and Jesse Winker to the Milwaukee Brewers for Colton Wong. That was a mega disaster. Colton Wong ended up having one of the worst seasons in all of baseball that year while he played for Seattle. And then to add insult to injury, he was traded to the Dodgers midway through the year and performed pretty well for LA. The one big signing they would make in the offseason was signing Teoscar Hernandez to a one-year deal, who had just had a good couple years with Toronto. He had a decent season in Seattle, but not like his previous years, unfortunately. And that's really all they did in the offseason. And instead of buying at the deadline like they had the previous year, they would end up selling. They would end up trading Paul Sewald to the Arizona Diamondbacks for Ryan Bliss, Dominic Canzone, and Josh Rojas. And I can't really blame the Mariners for selling this year, because at the deadline, they were only 4 games over 500 and 4th in the AL West. Granted, they were only 3.5 games back of the wild card, so I can see the argument that they should have bought. And I can also see the argument to like this video if you're enjoying the content and subscribe if you want to see more. And hindsight is always 2020, because they actually took off after the trade deadline and would finish 88-74, just missing the playoffs. 2024 was kind of the same story. No major signings in the offseason and would trade away multiple pieces. They said goodbye to Eugenio Suarez and traded him to the Arizona Diamondbacks. We'll get to him later. They would also trade away Jared Kelenic along with Evan White and Marco Gonzalez to the Atlanta Braves. They would also send over Jose Caballero to the Rays in exchange for Luke Raley. They would also trade away Robbie Ray very early on in his new deal to the Giants for Anthony DeSclafani and old friend Mitch Haniger. They would also flip Anthony DeSclafani to the Twins for Jorge Polanco. A lot of trades before the season started. And on July 31st, they were tied for first place, albeit only 4 games over 500, but they would still buy anyway. They would give it their best effort to make a splash at the deadline and traded for Randy Arozarena for the Tampa Bay Rays, as well as Justin Turner and Jimmy Garcia from the Toronto Blue Jays. Very, very solid pieces, but it was still just not enough. And once again, they barely missed the playoffs, finishing 2nd in the AL West. So lots of moves, lots of questionable moves that would keep the team around where they had been the last several years. But when was this team ever going to full send and actually make big moves to get to the next level? There's been one common theme with the Seattle Mariners over the past few seasons. Their pitching has been absolutely dominant over the last several years, especially their young starting pitching. And that is so hard to come by. When you have a pitching staff full of guys making all of their starts and staying healthy consistently, you got to take advantage of that, because having that kind of starting pitching healthy is very rare for a full season, and the Mariners just haven't taken advantage of that. 2025 needed to be different in this regard. However, they still didn't do much of anything this offseason. They did re-sign Jorge Polanco, who had a very questionable year with them in 2024. They also signed Rowdy Tellez, who had been very inconsistent to say the least in his major league career. And to make things worse, this year before the season started, Jordan Kirby would go down with an injury and would miss a lot of time. Logan Gilbert would also go down in April with an injury and miss about 6 weeks. Now, these are 2 starters that have Cy Young potential in the American League, and that's the danger of relying heavily on your starting pitching. Injuries are just part of the game, and when it comes to a starting rotation, it's more of a question of when, not if. And anytime pitchers of that caliber go down, it's a little bit nerve-wracking. Luckily, their injuries weren't significant. No Tommy John surgery or anything like that. And despite missing 2 AL Cy Young frontrunners for the first couple months of the season, the Seattle Mariners were still leading the AL West for the first couple couple months of the season. Brian Wu and Luis Castillo had been holding it down in that rotation. Plus, they were getting major contributions on the offensive side. Jorge Polanco had an amazing April, almost having a 1300 OPS, hitting 8 homers. That really helped them in the first month of the season. JP Crawford also got off to a great start and was having a much better year than his 2024 season. We all know what Cal Raleigh's doing. He's having one of the best offensive seasons from a catcher we've ever seen. And if he stays healthy through the remainder of the season, it will be one of, if not the best season of all time from a catcher. However, fast forward up to the trade deadline. The Houston Astros got hot and Seattle now trailed Houston at the deadline. And it seemed like we've seen this story before. Seattle just cannot break through, get to that next level, and win the division. But this year's different. They would make some big moves, and they might have made one of the biggest splashes at the trade deadline of any team in baseball. They would go make a trade with the Arizona Diamondbacks to get Josh Naylor to play first base, and he was definitely one of the most coveted bats that was available at the deadline this year. He's a free agent at the end of the season, but this is a big move because Seattle really hadn't got much production from first base all year. They had Rowdy Tellez there, and they already released him. He's no longer with the team. He plays for the Rangers now. And what has Josh Naylor done since coming over? He's put an OPS plus over 150 and an OPS over 900. But most surprisingly is that he has led all of MLB with stolen bases since coming over from the D-backs. He's stolen 11 bags. I never would have thought a guy with Josh Naylor's stature would be swiping 11 bags in the span of about 2 weeks. They would also go out and get Eugenio Suarez back from the Arizona Diamondbacks, and he was probably the most coveted right-handed bat in the deadline. He'd been having arguably the best season of his career up to this point, hitting 36 homers and an OPS plus around 140 with the D-backs. Adding those two players makes this team look very, very dangerous. Not only did they get offensive help, but George Kirby and Logan Gilbert are back in the rotation pitching very, very well. Luis Castillo has still been good all year long, and Brian Wu has stepped up tremendously this season. He has not had a start this season where he didn't complete 6 innings of work. He has made 23 starts so far this season, and he has gone 6 innings in each one. That is insane consistency. He has been ridiculous this season. And at the time of recording, they have tied the Houston Astros for the American League West. They're 9-1 in their last 10 games and on a current 8-game winning streak. And it's not even the big players that are contributing offensively during the last couple weeks, during that 9-1 run. You would think over a stretch like that you'd be getting great production from guys like Cal Raleigh. But since the deadline, he's been in a little bit of a slump with an OPS under 700. And since getting back to Seattle, Eugenio Suarez has been anything but impressive, hitting under 100, only hitting 1 home run and having an OPS under 400. But that's kind of the point I'm trying to make right now, is that they are 9-1 in their last 10 despite those guys not really contributing. They're getting contributions from all over their roster, and that's what good teams do. They don't have to rely on 1 or 2 guys to stay hot and keep things moving. Julio Rodriguez has come alive once again in the second half. He's been playing fantastically, on pace for having another 30-30 season. JP Crawford has been very, very solid throughout the whole year, having a much better year than last year. Dominic Canzone has had a couple of decent stretches. Randy Arozarena is arguably having the best year of his career, also on pace for a 30-30 season. We've already talked about Josh Naylor and how well he's been doing since coming over from the D-backs. And rookie Cole Young over the last 10 games has had an OPS right around 1,000. So they are getting contributions from all over the lineup, not just relying on a couple guys. Not to mention that their starting rotation is almost back to full strength. Bryce Miller, who has been hurt and on the IL, he's on his way back. Granted, he hasn't been very good when he was on the mound this year, but that could have been due to his injury. But he's on his way back, and when he returns, the Mariners will have all of their starters healthy from last season, and that's going to be extremely dangerous. Imagine the rotation is firing on all cylinders, and imagine the lineup when Cal Raleigh and Eugenio Suarez get hot at the same time. It might not happen, but I think it will happen. And their starting pitching when healthy has been so consistent. And for these reasons, I think the Seattle Mariners could be the team to beat, not just in the American League West, but in the American League in general, and quite possibly all of baseball. It's an exciting time for the Mariners right now, and I'm excited to see what they can do if they stay healthy throughout the rest of the year and get to October.